right, so you just learned about the simplest of conditional statements that we can do, and that's just a basic if statement. And the way to think about this is, if some test expression is true, we want to execute some statement, right? So we could even just make this as simple as this. If true, we want to go ahead and execute, and let's just say print execute some code. Right? And because this statement is in fact true, then we print out that. But if this is false, you see that nothing happens. Now, typically the way that we do this is we have some actual tests, some conditional tests that gets applied. And we saw this back in module 1, if you remember. Lots of times we use these relational operators, right? So basically testing if something is equal to, not equal to, is greater than, and so on. And if that condition holds, then we're going to execute some code. So we could even say x equals 3, and let's just test if x is greater than 2. Then what we can even say here is we're just going to go ahead and say x plus 1. All right, and let's go ahead and print out what that equates to. So you can see when that runs, we see x is 3, and since x is greater than 2, we end up doing this computation here. If I were to go ahead and say x is greater than 4, which in fact x is not, then you see nothing happens. Right? So we also saw, if I go back to lesson 1C and scroll down here, we saw some other type of operators that we can use. And this is whether something is or is not, right? So I could say, basically we have x equals something. So in this case, we could say, I just want if x is actually an object of sorts, right? I want to do something with that. And so I can go ahead and I can say, and what I'm going to do here is actually say, if x, I'm going to have x be a list, right? And this list contains something, only one thing. And I just want to say, so if there is an object or something within this list, I want to do something, right? And so I could just say, so if x is true, then I want to print this object contains something. Right? And in fact, since there is something, some element within this list, then x will be true, right? But if this was an empty list where it contains nothing, and now I check if x exists, since x is a list but it's empty list, then Python is going to see that as false. So you see nothing happens, right? So and this is with any object. If it was an empty data frame, if it was an empty list, if it was empty tuple, whatever it be, right? If there's nothing in it, if it is empty, Python considers it false. If it contains some elements or more than one element, then Python sees it as true. Now, there are some other operators that we can use. For example, let's say x contains 1, 4, and 6. And what I could do is I could say, if the number 2 is in x, right, then I can say this value exists. So now what's going to happen is Python is going to check to see if 2 is in x, and in fact it is, so we execute this code. Right? If I were to say if 1 is in x, since that is not true, we don't execute the code, right? And we've seen how we could even add multiple conditions, right? I could say if 1 is in x, or if 2 is in x. And since one of these is true, we're going to execute this code. But if I were to say and, this is going to require both of these conditions to be true, this one and also this one, and we'll see nothing happens. All right, so how can we use this information to go ahead and work on this knowledge check? The knowledge check is basically to create a conditional statement here where if X is, or if the month value is between 1 and 9, we want to execute this code. And if it's not, then we don't. So how could I do this? Well, there's a few different ways we could do this, right? I could say if X is greater than 0, and X is less than 10, right? So this is requiring X to be between basically 1 up to the value of 9, but not less than 0, or less than 1, or greater than 9, right? And we can see if I run this, whoop, I can't be using X, I need to be using month. That is our variable of interest. Now we see it works. If I were to supply 0, it doesn't do anything. If I had a value greater than 9, you see it doesn't do anything, right? Another option for this is, and this would be a simpler one, to say is if month is in the range of 1 up to but not including 10. So range, if you recall from this, what range is doing is it's creating the values 1, starting at this value here, up to but not including this. So you can see I'm basically creating a value range of 1 up to 9. Right? So now I can go ahead and check, and if my month value falls within that range, great. If it doesn't, then nothing happens.